Good evening and welcome to part 2 of WDI USA's monthly exploration of what the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights means for women and girls in real life. Each month this year, we will explore an article of the Declaration. We will host a panel of women who will speak about what that particular article means for her in her actual life. We will explore why the Declaration is so important for the lives of women and girls. We are hoping in this series to really bring the Declaration to life. This live webinar is exclusively for women. If you are not a woman, we encourage you to watch it later on YouTube. Article 2 of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights states, among other things, maternal rights and services that are based on women's unique capacity to gestate and give birth to children. The physical and biological characteristics that distinguish males and females mean that women's reproductive capacity cannot be shared by men who claim a female gender identity. States should understand that the inclusion of men who claim a female gender identity into the legal category of mother in law, policies, and practice, and the corresponding inclusion of women who claim a male gender identity into the category of father constitute discrimination against women by seeking to eliminate women's unique status and sex-based rights as mothers. States should ensure that the word mother and other words traditionally used to refer to women's reproductive capacities on the basis of sex continue to be used in constitutional acts, legislation, in the provision of maternal services, and in policy documents when referring to mothers and motherhood. The meaning of the word mother shall not be changed to include men. I am tonight's facilitator. I will be introducing each of our speakers and facilitating the question and answer session to follow. If you'd like to ask a question, please place your question in the Q&A box rather than using chat. Our format will be a little bit different tonight than it was last month. I'll introduce each speaker in turn, but rather than have them talk for 10 to 15 minutes, they'll talk for only 5 to 7 minutes. Then I'll step back and they will talk amongst themselves for another 15 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for discussion. I expect tonight's conversation to be rich and spirited. With that, let's get started. Lorraine Nolan is a member of the WDI Board of Directors, a mother, and a passionate advocate for women and children. She resides in Connecticut with her 2 daughters. Welcome, Lorraine.
Good evening, everyone. I've always wanted to be a mother. How I arrived at motherhood didn't make a difference to me. Whether through traditional marriage or adoption, I simply wanted to be a mother. As crazy as it sounds, my only reason for even thinking about marriage in the past was because I wanted children, not necessarily a husband. In my 30s, I decided to pursue my true dream of motherhood on my own. I didn't then, and I don't now, feel that there was or is a need for a male presence. With the support of family and close friends, I took the plunge into motherhood. I also didn't expect the journey to motherhood to be as difficult as it was. Whether my bout with preeclampsia, hospitalization, the pain of C-sections and recovery, breastfeeding, not being able to breastfeed, and being made to feel guilty if I didn't, or police if I dared to breastfeed my baby in public. These are difficulties only women face. During my pregnancy and birth experience, I didn't have the misfortune of being referred to as a Black birthing body, or any other horrible term that sounds as though it came from the antebellum South, slavery. Such language was unthinkable at the time. My intention was never to become a Black birthing body or any other type of dehumanizing phrase some are attempting to force upon me and other women. Speaking of Black birthing bodies, I've never heard the phrase white birthing body, Asian birthing body, or Latina birthing body. Not that I should have heard those phrases, of course. I've just never heard it used towards women of other racial groups. Either women are all lumped together or they point out the Black birthing body. No matter who says it, this is based in misogyny, the hatred of Black women. Just consider other contexts where we usually hear the word body: the body shop, the host body, the dead body, now the Black birthing body. A body is either a thing or something to be used and abused or dead. There is a reason why people feel so comfortable singling out Black women for such racist, dehumanizing language, and I don't accept it. I don't consent to it. If you are a woman with self-respect, you won't either. Fortunately, I was called an expectant mom, mother-to-be, or simply a mother. It was a beautiful experience when both my children started calling me Ma as babies. I can't imagine being called anything else. That is why I find the push to distort motherhood so disheartening. Giving that title to anyone other than a woman is a gross distortion. Why? Let's talk about what a mother is. She is a female parent, a title meant to show that she is distinct from the male parent. She could be a biological mother, an adoptive mother, a birth mother whose child was adopted, or even a stepmother. Let's not even talk about how the stepmother archetype is vilified throughout the fairy tales we grew up with, as opposed to stepfathers. This is in spite of what we see in real life, but I digress. I bet no one can even fathom a mother being anything other than a woman. The word mother has a special and maybe even a sacred meaning to me. Mothers are our safe space, something I always pledge to be to my own daughters. Mothers comfort and care for us when we are sick. Mothers encourage us when we feel inadequate. Mothers advocate for us to get the education we need. But make no mistake, these are not stereotypes or claims that only mothers do these things. These are characteristics of caregivers. Let's be honest, mothers, women, are usually the primary caregivers and sometimes the only caregivers of children. The work that mothers, women, do must be acknowledged, and we must use respectful terms to describe our mothers. Those of you that grew up in Christian circles similar to mine, remember church mothers. These are the women that mothered those of us that lost our own mothers through death. They disciplined us, corrected us, and sometimes did the preaching. Church mothers provided guidance and wisdoms to young women and young men alike. Don't forget the delicious food they cooked during special events. They were respected just as much as the male pastors were. In fact, the male pastors just revered them. I remember them with fondness. Then there are the celebrated grandmothers. I never knew my maternal grandmother. She died before I was born. I was born in 1973, the year women won the right to an abortion if women so chose. Yay. My mom received discouraging news from her obstetrician about my worth to enter into the world. So my grandmother encouraged my newly married 18-year-old mother to continue because I would be a girl. She was right, and here I am. She died of breast cancer that same year. I had the honor of knowing my paternal grandmother, who I always enjoyed spending time with and eating the delicious breakfast she prepared for me, my brother, and my sister. She also died of breast cancer, but her memory lives on in the face of my younger daughter, spitting image. Most of us have fond memories of our mothers. I would like to close with a quote from the 1970s group The Intruders' popular hit, "I'll Always Love My Mama." As you hear, think of your mother or grandmother, and if you unfortunately did not have the best relationship with your mother, think of a woman that stepped into that role. Whatever the case may be, they are not birthing bodies or birthing parents. They are mothers, women. And here's the quote. "A mother's love is so special. It's something that you can't describe. It's the kind of love that stays with you until the day you die." Thank you.
Wow, Lorraine, thank you so much. That was just incredibly, incredibly powerful. I will now introduce Isabella Maulbin. Isabella is a life coach for sovereign women, a trained hypnotist, passionate birth worker, and podcaster. Through one-on-one coaching, Isabella teaches women the tools to stop getting triggered by every freaking thing, cultivate resistance, increase self-confidence, and birth in sovereignty. On the Whose Body Is It podcast, Isabella interviews radical women from around the world, raising consciousness on the harms of transgender ideology, porn, and prostitution, and exposing all the things we've been told are good for us as women. Isabella.
Thank you, Kara, and thank you, WDI, for having me on the panel. And wow, thank you, Lorraine, for. Oh, okay. I'm gearing up. I'm still reeling from Lorraine's share. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the overlap in the birthing industry in terms of the euphemisms and the attempts to obscure language and our experiences as women, and those of you who are here who are mothers as well. Many women who go into women's health, whether that's as a midwife, a doula, a reproductive health educator, I believe sincerely wants to improve the lives of women and girls and mothers. And one of the motivations of women getting into this field is because we believe that there is an injustice, right, specific to women happening in the birth industry. Now, this is the hypocrisy of the organizations that are promoting female erasure. When I say female erasure, I mean compulsory speak. So organizations asking eager young women who want to change the world, who want to solve the injustices of the world, to eliminate the word woman and mother from their vocabulary. Now, I said this is hypocritical, and it's ironic because the women getting into this work are in it because of its specific reach on women and girls, for women and girls. So one of the issues that, in terms of female erasure that we see in the birthing industry is the inability to name harm. Now, if we eliminate all the trans ideology within the birthing industry, we are already facing an inability to name harm. We are already dealing with euphemisms that obscure abuse within that system. And some of the examples that first come to mind are terms like belly birth, gentle cesarean, cervical check. These are some examples of the way that language has been promoted to really benefit the system rather than the women who are subjected to cesarean sections, for example. So I want to talk a little bit about belly birth because it started off as a campaign to raise awareness about what a C-section is, right? That was its a positive intention, but it has been co-opted by the birthing industry to normalize C-section as a really reasonable replacement for vaginal birth. Now, we know that in rare cases, women do need C-sections, and I am grateful for that medical intervention, but it has been obscured to actually normalize, right? So what started off with a good intention has now been used to normalize a major abdominal surgery, which only benefits the pharmaceutical industry and the birthing industry at large. And I bring this up specifically because criticizing these terms and honing in on these euphemisms within that industry is, if we're talking about a mainstream doula space or midwifery space, this is highly discouraged. And what I appreciate so much about radical feminism or a radical feminist analysis is the ability to name harm, right? And so if we cannot name harm, if we cannot isolate the industries that are causing harm to only women and mothers, women and babies, mothers and babies, how can we even critique the other elements of the hypocrisy, which of course in this case are, is the mandating the compulsory speak, saying things like men give birth. So this is how I have encountered female erasure. It is through the birthing industry, and they're really smart in kind of getting to the core, right? They went for the most empathetic women, really with sincerity, who want to change the world. And they said, we're here, we know you're here to change birth, but before you get too far, before you make too much change, we're just going to redirect and talk about pregnant men. And so how I see female erasure, again, in this context, is I think about it in terms of making space for people who aren't there. Now, this is entirely different than actual intersectional feminism. When I think of female erasure, when I think about birth and motherhood being specific to females, I visualize women sitting in circle, talking about people who don't exist, pregnant men. Who are these pregnant men? Where are they? Now, having a training specific to women who have been highly medicalized, whether we're talking about a pregnant mother who is, has been deemed clinically obese, whether she is high risk because she's an IVF pregnancy, whatever it is. Now, that's an interesting conversation. Let's talk about women whose pregnancies have been highly medicalized. Let's talk about women's lives who have been women whose lives have been highly medicalized, right? But that is not what is happening in my field. It is a compulsory speak. You must say men can give birth to get work, to have a good reputation, to be inclusive, to be loving, all the things that we know come up with this debate. So the last thing I guess I want to say is that women already hold so much when it comes to processing their births, with the stories of our births, whether we are questioning the necessity for a certain intervention or outcome, whether we're processing the way that we were born, the way that we came into the world. I think of my grandmother, who was put under general anesthetic and had babies, just truly ripped from her womb. So we have a lot to hold. We haven't come so far in this realm in terms of reclaiming our bodies and being embodied women in this sector. And so to add on something else, to just kind of pile on the shit, excuse my French, really, I have zero tolerance for. So, and those who don't know me, I was indoctrinated myself in 2016 through a doula training. And so I went through the process of being an eager sponge and adopting this language, really sincerely believing that this was what women needed, that we had come so far that we could make space for the people who aren't there, when, anyone could look around the room and see a lot of shit that still needed to be worked out. So yeah, we are holding a lot, and we simply do not have the time and space to be centering people who aren't with us and who simply actually do not even exist. So yeah, I think I'll end it there.
Thanks, Isabella. That is so rich. I'm so excited for the rest of this conversation. So now I'll introduce Candice Jackson. Candice is an attorney who served as Deputy General Counsel in the U.S. Education Department. Since leaving her government position in 2021, Candice has been active in the movement to preserve legal recognition of the female sex class. But her favorite role is being a mother to twins, Madeline and Zachary, age 8. Welcome, Candice.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be part of this special panel. My experience with motherhood is one that began for me later in life, in my mid-30s. I hadn't really been familiar until Lorraine brought it up, talking with her earlier this week, of the phrase choice motherhood. But in a way, it kind of maybe applies to me too, because when a woman falls in love with a woman and they get married, and then years later they decide that they would like to have a child, that miracle of making a baby is only going to happen by deliberate choice and planning. My wife and I decided that since we were older, we would have just an only child. And so I will never forget when I had an early first trimester ultrasound and the technician says, well, there's one heartbeat and there's the second one. And my wife and I look at each other. And then my wife says to the technician, the second what exactly? So unexpectedly, I had the experience of a twin pregnancy. By just over 21 weeks, I was starting to dilate, and that was much, much, much too early for those babies to be born. So thankfully, they ended up staying put through a rocky pregnancy. And despite complications, my little girl and boy were born full term and healthy, and huge birth weight for twins. After my little girl was born, though, 24 minutes after my son, I hemorrhaged badly, and several emergency measures had to be performed to save my life. But that experience just pales in comparison to the meaning and just no questions asked, worth it all nature of becoming a mother that way. It changed my life, as it always has, always does, always will for women. And although I often talk in terms of being a parent, for instance, when discussing legal rights that parents have, I'm not just a parent. I am a mother, a mom, a female parent. My wife and I have been open with our twins about how they were conceived and how they were born. And although they have two parents, like a lot of other kids in their peer groups, they don't generically have two parents. They have two mothers. They call my wife Mama, they call me Mommy, and they understand the role of a mother, both in terms of nurture and in terms of birth. So while they look to both of their female parents as nurturers, they do distinguish between us two, often affectionately calling me birth mother. And I snuggle them and tell them how special it was to get to give them a place to grow from a little tiny dot. And this may be TMI, too much information, but I had the bonding experience of breastfeeding Madeline and Zachary for long enough that they have some memories of that. And they often call me Milky because of it. But that breastfeeding experience was a journey and a bond that was made possible only through the wisdom passed to me from my own mother and a compassionate, dedicated lactation aide who worked very closely and gently with me for many, many weeks to help my milk come in after a traumatic birth experience with lots of blood loss, and to coach me and teach me how to care for two babies at once. So this experience of becoming a mother, especially through the birth process, ended up connecting me with the positive, powerful aspect of being a member of the female sex class. It brought into my world and my thoughts a dimension of being a woman that took perspective away from the burdens of having a female body and really let me focus on how that burden can be an incredibly special privilege too. And while, Lorraine so beautifully put it, of course, a woman can become a mother without giving birth. The meaning of mother as a female parent just cannot be severed from the uniquely female role in gestating and birthing new humans. This is why I think it does all mothers and maybe lesbian mothers especially a great disservice to push an anti-factual ideological agenda, trying to convince us that a man can choose to be a mother. There is no gestation or adoption or any other process that can remove or separate motherhood from being a uniquely female experience. And pretending that kind of separation can be done just leaves women in more danger of feeling and being treated socially and legally as generic people, some of whom just happen to have some strange bodily functions that once in a while end up popping out new humans. And then conversely, by denying that mothers are women, female parents, it erases the reality experienced by a lot of lesbian couples in particular, that women can have a variety of feminine and masculine traits and characteristics. So accurately naming a mother as a female parent doesn't constrain any individual woman from expressing a wide range of traits. The other aspect is that ripping the word mother from away from being a female parent is, in my view, a grave injustice to children too, who deserve clarity about the reality of women's unique role in sexual reproduction. It's one thing for a child to have two mothers, but the child will only ever have one female parent who gave birth to them, and no male parent will ever have had that role in creating their life. So allowing the law to call a female parent, especially one who birthed the child's father instead of the child's mother, distorts for that child the understanding of men's and women's roles in bringing forth children in a way that might forever haunt the child, because after all, most children only ever desire to please their parent, even if that means pretending that the female who birthed you is a father. So with that, I'm just really looking forward to taking part in the rest of our seminar with these amazing women. Thank you.
Thanks, Candice. That was really great. So I've been jotting down some questions that I could ask all of you, but based on a conversation that the four of us had earlier this week that I just thought was really riveting, with me taking a step back and the three of you talking with each other, I'm equally happy to do that. So I think I'm going to take a step back, and I would love to hear, and I think our participants would also love to hear your reactions to each other. Anyone can go first.
Well, Isabella, thank you for clarifying about belly birthing, because as I mentioned before, my dream was to have like a water birth and do all this natural, do everything the natural way. But unfortunately, that didn't work out for me. And I still have this gnawing, feeling in my mind, like, did I really need a C-section with my first daughter? Was it because I was too impatient? I asked the doctor, why is this taking so long? So thank you for clarifying that and, talking about the normalization of this major surgery.
Isabella, do you want to say more about that?
Sure. I think I'll be responding to actually both Candice and Lorraine's points in this. Another euphemism that comes to mind is the fed is best, right? Now we can hold that many women don't get to breastfeed, and I would say that's, more so than a physiologic deficiency, it's a lack of support, lack of education, massive intervention in the pregnancy and birth process. Even something like the IV fluids that a baby gets in a standard hospital birth will fill their little bellies so much so that they may not even be interested in the breast, which is what they're built to do. They're just built to suck, they've been swallowing in the womb all those months. But I don't want to go too far on a tangent, but the fed is best slogan, I think I was actually really helpful in normalizing seeing pictures of women who have had their breasts cut off with their scars with the baby to their chest, what was their breast tissue. I think in some ways, the formula industry has kind of paved the way for, someone to say, oh, well, there's no breasts on that woman, but, oh, I guess there's always formula or donor milk, or I guess it's not that bad because all these other women do it who have breasts, right? So I think they're all kind of interrelated, and just like we know, without the pervasiveness of misogyny, we wouldn't see, as many women doing what they've done to their bodies and being, preyed upon by these industries. I see a kind of, an intersection with the fed is best slogans. For anyone who hasn't heard that before, is was kind of started by formula companies to well, they kind of framed it as, we're not going to judge mothers, we're not going to shame mothers, but we all know that there is an optimal way for a mammal to, get their food, right? And it's okay to say that. We can also hold that women face a lot in, birthing in, under patriarchy.
And I'm seeing in the comments pop up, great observations, like, as we're seeing right now, formula is not always available anyway. Why would we disrupt that and discourage, end up disincentivizing that natural process that has sustained generation to generation since forever?
So another thing that Isabella said that was just very interesting is this connection between an industry that is depriving women of healthy breasts, called the trans industry or the gender identity industry, encouraging women to remove their healthy breast tissue, and the birth industry. And I'm wondering if any of the three of you want to say anything about connections between those.
That honestly never occurred to me, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. I mean, the formula companies need to continue to make money. And, if they can cut off, because here's the thing. We know that women, they're gender dysphoric about, and some women want to become men. However, I noticed that some of them still retain their ability to have babies. And then I'm noticing, I guess the formula industry, they have to maintain their money. If these women don't have breasts, then, they can, just dish out more formula. But I honestly never thought about it before this.
I do think there's a wide connection. I think that the more separated from the organic process of carrying, gestating, and then birthing and feeding a newborn baby, the more divided up that gets, the more categorized it gets, the more mechanistic it gets, the more we're convinced that every step has to be medically and technologically overseen and approved ahead of time. The more that happens, and then you step back and see, all right, so it's been one thing to deal for a few decades with sort of a medicalization of pregnancy and birth. And now we're seeing a next iteration of that expand into, surrogacy is taking off like never before. So now it's just a matter of mix and matching different ways of growing an embryo, and then, having it develop long enough so that it can be live on its own, and then give it something that'll sustain it with enough nutrition. I mean, it's just very sterile and artificial and mix and match. It's a very strange, it's veering into that post-human aspect that dovetails to me alongside the anti-female aspect of the transgender movement.
So something that I think about frequently, and I wanted to say thank you, Candice, for sharing some pretty intimate details of your own birth experience. When I have spoken with a lot of women who have given birth, and I have not, a lot of women have told me that they don't really want to tell the details of their experience giving birth. And I find that to be very interesting. And I don't want to, I would never want to be invasive and ask a woman to reveal details about something that she doesn't want to talk about. And so I'm not doing that here. And Isabella, I know you're not a mom either, but I know that you have worked with many pregnant and birthing moms. And I'm wondering if the three of you want to address sort of what makes women not want to tell their own birthing stories?
I want to hear Isabella's theory on, or experience with redemptive birth. I've heard you now explain that a little bit, and I think everybody would benefit from hearing that, because what comes to mind based on Kara's question is the way that we have been pushed to be kind of passive in this whole process means that everything that happens, if there is a true emergency factor going on, or a life and death situation that emerges for us for ourselves or our baby, whatever that is, there's the level of that as trauma, but there's also the level of that as guilt and as a different sort of victimization. It's not a natural occurrence that is potentially tragic and causing emotion, but there's that second dimension there of, did I let this happen? Should I have done something differently? Did I put myself in the hands of, the experts in the right way? There's all of that these days, I think, that factors into any kind of complication or difficulty around a birth or a pregnancy.
Yeah, so I think the first thing, why do women not want to share their birth stories? I think there are still so many answered questions that women have. There, as you said, there's the guilt, there's confusion, there's pain. The reason why women aren't jumping to tell their birth stories is because ecstatic orgasmic birth has been taken from us. Women didn't get together and say, oof, remember like all those like amazing rite of passages we all had? Like, we don't want them anymore. We don't want them anymore. We want fewer orgasms. We want fewer spiritual experiences. We want fewer ecstatic experiences. Just take them away as quickly as possible, right? Women didn't get together and do that. Birth was systematically taken out of women's hands. And a really short, beautiful read is a book called Witches, Nurses, and Midwives. And it goes into the history of how birth was stolen from us as women. And so I think that's the first thing, so orgasmic ecstatic birth is no longer the norm. I think culturally we are conditioned to, as women, to be grateful for our fertility, which is kind of strange because women are fertility. Now, women under, the current environmental conditions and our, the food and the water that we have access, yes, all the endocrine disruptors, I could see how, getting pregnant easily in this day and age might appear to be a privilege, but this is a modern phenomena for women to have to be grateful and say, oh, I'm so lucky. And I wouldn't want to talk about, how easy it was for me in front of another woman because of, the real difficulties that are present. So I think also women are conditioned to be grateful for the healthy baby. If it has been a struggle, even if it's a horrendously abusive, traumatic birth experience, women are told, be grateful. You spent tens of thousands of dollars to make this happen, whether that's IVF or, taking off work or, reorient your whole life to make space for this child. You should be grateful. And then there's also the fear, I think women have of taking it out on the baby, right? Resenting the baby. I could go further, but yeah, I think that I'll leave it there for now.
You've worked with women that have had what you've described as redemptive births. Could you talk about that?
Sure. So my background was supporting women primarily in hospital births, birthing center births, and at home with licensed midwives. I now exclusively support women outside of the medical paradigm, meaning that I am attending women exclusively who are birthing on their own terms. So what that looks like for them, when I say on their own terms, is with their partner, maybe an older child, maybe a mom, maybe a sister, and me. So the issue with complaining about the system is that, is kind of coming to the option that we don't have to use it and that we never used it. Actually, it's relatively a recent experience that women are actually entrusting strange men to put full fists inside their bodies when a baby is coming through. I mean, think about that. I like the cervical check. That is what a cervical check is. That is a whole, I'm sorry if this is triggering anyone, like I'm talking, it's bad. It's really bad. That is a euphemism for a stranger putting their hand inside of you, cervical check, right? So yes, I supported one woman in particular who maybe I'll kind of summarize her story, and this is public. Her story was shared on the Free Birth Society podcast, which is all about reclaiming birth, taking birth back into your own hands as women, especially, many of the stories are of women who have had first time traumatic births. I supported a woman who had 3 C-sections before having her first vaginal birth. And there are some stories of women having five surgical births and then having their vaginal birth. So anything is possible. We are miraculously self-healing in that way. But this particular woman was a woman of color. She went in for a routine, what's called just kind of, I don't know what the actual term is called, but I call it a kind of surveillance check. So she's late in pregnancy. It's like kind of a routine. They're taking her blood pressure. They are maybe taking urine sample, and they're listening to the baby's heartbeat with sonography. And they get her baby on the screen. She's about 37 weeks and they don't like what they see. And this happens all the time. When you are under surveillance, when your body is under constant surveillance, I'm talking weekly checks, there's always something wrong. If there wasn't anything wrong, there would be no industry, so they're constantly finding problems. And there's a lot to be said about, being in that environment causing the problem. So iatrogenic harm. So, she goes in there, everything's fine, but it's so scary to have a strange man put his fist inside of you that it causes panic. And oh, look, the baby also is panicked. Who is this guy? So she has a unnecessary emergency C-section, is put under general anesthetic, wakes up to her mother in post-op, and meets her baby a couple hours later. So she pieces together her story and she processes, that this wasn't necessary postpartum, and she gets pregnant again. And she says, this time, nah, never again. She doesn't even take a pregnancy test. Why does she need to? Her belly is growing. Her period has not come. She knows she's pregnant. More industry. Oh, well, she just saved a couple $100. I know some women who took 9 to 10 pregnancy tests for one pregnancy, just to know, just to be sure, and there's the excitement, there's the tangibility of I am pregnant. So she doesn't even take a pregnancy test. She has what's called a wild pregnancy. And with that comes responsibility. With that comes, a dance with death. What outcome am I willing to take responsibility for, including death? Again, babies die in hospitals, babies die in birthing centers, babies die with licensed medical professionals. So it is not specific to birthing outside the system, but there is once you take away that illusion, it's all on you. You can no longer point the finger when something doesn't go the way you wanted it to go. So she ended up having her second little boy in the blizzard in 2021 here in Texas. And I was with her out in a rural-ish area, and we were stuck there for 4 days, and she redeemed herself. And I use that word redemption because there was that element of blame. Like, I should have known better, when she went back and said that white OBGYN who told me that I needed to be really careful because, she was Black, just saying things to really fearmonger, assuming that she had a bad health history because of her race. So all sorts of things where she would go back and say, the signs were there. The signs were there. And I would offer to anyone who's had a traumatic birth and who's known something was up in the moment, it's generally a little too late at that point, right? So release the blame, right? There is a grooming process from our own births. how this is going to go. Indoctrination around how birth is and what is safe and what is not. We are all victims of that programming. And so, yeah, she did make a choice to birth outside the system, and it was a beautiful experience, and wasn't easy. I don't think she would say it was an easy process. It's all pregnant women tell me it's kind of a mind game for most of the time of, whoa, there's actually a baby inside me that is growing. Wow, there is a skeleton inside me forming like right now. I mean, it's pretty weird. It's pretty strange. But yes, she had a beautiful redemptive birth.
So I don't, excuse me, I don't know about anyone else. I don't necessarily want to end on this, but for me, the word redemptive just has so many religious kind of, I know these days we don't like the word trigger because it's overused and everything, but I have sort of a knee-jerk emotional reaction to the words redemptive or redemption, as though the woman you're describing, Isabella, has something that she needs to be redeemed for, or something like that, when she was clearly a victim of a patriarchal, misogynistic medical system that victimized her. So I'm guessing from what I know about your practice and your politics that you don't mean that. But in case some participants are kind of feeling the way that I'm feeling in reaction to the term redemption or redemptive, do you want to address that a little bit?
Yeah, I think of one of Lear Keith's quote. I don't want to butcher it, but she says something around the fact that we are more than what they've made us to be. So before we can make decisions, before we can even attempt to be agents of free will, we have to see what's going on, in a larger spectrum, as a class. So for her, it's the class analysis. And so I find that true in the context of, taking responsibility for one's birth, and maybe redemptive isn't the perfect word, but I will say that there is an element of correction that happened for her in her process. And I think without that, she may have remained in the victimization and would have recreated and participated and co-created a repeat C-section, which is the recommendation for women who have had C-sections. It's to just have another. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, it does. Okay, I don't know if this will take us to the end of our hour. I do want to close this right at the top of the hour. I think what I'd like to do, if it's okay with the three of you, is tell a very quick story and get all of your reactions to this story. And part of the reason I want to tell the story is that there's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on in terms of the contrast between the birthing process in the early 1970s versus today. There's a lot going on here in terms of hospital birth versus non-hospital birth. And there's a lot going on in this story involving a man being involved in a woman's birth at her request, which is also interesting. And there are other things going on in here too. So I'll tell the story, and I'd love to hear all of your reactions. Don't hold back, because the story, one of the actors in the story is my father. I'm not attached to any particular critique of the story or whatever, like say whatever you want to say. Okay, so here's the story in brief. The time is, I don't know, 1975 or thereabouts. And my father is a general practitioner in a small town. And he has, I don't know what the correct term is now, but at the time it was said that he had delivered some number of babies. And a friend, a very close family friend who I'm still friends with, in fact, this woman asked him to deliver her baby in the small town hospital, and he agreed to do that. And she went into labor, and at the time there was no pressure to have a C-section, and she had a very long labor, and the hospital just let her have her labor, and it was going to take as long as it was going to take. And the hospital, also the rules were such that he could go in there whenever he wanted to, or whenever she wanted her physician to be present. In other words, he wasn't just like, leave me alone and call me when it's ready. He was available as her physician, whether we like that or not. I'm just saying that's an element of it. And so when she went into labor, she felt like it was too cold. And so he told the staff to turn the heat up, and they did. But then they didn't like it. So they turned the air conditioning back on and made it cold. And she complained that it was too cold. So he told the staff to do something about it. But they kept the air conditioning on, and it was too cold for her. And she was just really physically uncomfortable with the temperature in her birthing room. And so finally what happened is my dad, who was a treating physician in the hospital, just knocked the thermostat off the wall. He was like, we're not doing this. Like, my patient is uncomfortable. We're not adjusting the temperature anymore. We're going to make sure she's comfortable. And I'm like not taking any flack from the staff. And he did that in his thinking for her comfort. So, and she had her baby, and he's a healthy 40-something-year-old today. So I would just love to hear all of your reactions to that story. By the way, they all knew I was going to say that story.
Yes.
I'm not putting them on the spot. They knew.
Right. To be very honest, I am uncomfortable with male doctors because of my experiences. I will be honest about that. But I will say this, had maybe I encountered a doctor like your father, maybe I would not feel the way that I do. That's all I can say. I would probably feel a little bit better about having a male doctor.
What occurs to me is that it seems like it wasn't that the story isn't even so much about whether or not the medical professional side of your dad was needed, but more focused on support. Who's there to support the woman giving birth? And that is interesting because none of us on this whole panel, I don't think, have had a birth experience with a male support person. And I just know for me, my experience, what meant the most to me was having my own mother there. That kind of generational connection and calming and wisdom that, she could explain to me what things were like for her and tell me little vignette stories and do some, just hold my hand and just talk to me and things that in a way that my dad, as loving and caring as he is, it wouldn't have been the same as it was knowing that my mother, who had given birth to me, was there doing the same for me. And then it also occurs to me that, I think the story of your dad being an advocate for, even if he hadn't been her doctor, even if it was just as her friend helping her give birth, that advocacy role, I think women are given a short shrift that we're capable of that too, right? And so I know, my wife is very capable of being the strong advocate. Never seen her rip an air conditioner out of the wall, but I think she would if it came to it. So I think it's interesting to think of both of those elements, both in terms of what we assume maybe is a male thing that's positive, but isn't necessarily. That might just be a masculine trait. And like I was trying to say before, to think that women can't have that kind of masculinity or something is not right, not true.
Isabella, do you want to say anything?
So much. Okay, so first I'll say the charming part of that story is that your dad went against the hospital policy. He did something that his patient wanted. I think the main takeaway, that I get from that story is like she asked for crumbs and she got some. Like, she was already birthing in captivity, which is like what that is. It's not her house. It's not her rules. It's not her people. And she was uncomfortable. And to have that amount of stress in the room, even having to ask, I mean, words like "they let her," just like make me so mad. And yeah, I mean, I imagine the cortisol that she was releasing in that time. Oh, I'm hot. Wait, it's not working. Can they turn it down? Oh my God, he's going for it. Ooh, it's off, you know, and like that burst of testosterone, which I guess provided her some relief. But I would say these are all, you know, like crumbs. Like when we think about what was the norm, ecstatic orgasmic birth, to begging for a temp shift in a sterile room. I mean, we could do a lot better. We could really do a lot better for women. And maybe I'll just say one more thing about men in birth. I'm studying matriarchal societies with Heide Abendroth, and in modern matriarchal societies and ancient matriarchal societies, the men wouldn't even think to ask what happens at a birth. It is so not about them that they wouldn't even dream of intervening or assuming that they would be involved. It is solely for women. And so I don't live in a matriarchal society, clearly. So I think at this point in these social conditions, the only men I believe that, you know, should ever be at the birth are, you know, family members that are invited in by the birthing woman.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. You know, Lorraine, point taken about having a man involved in healthcare and in birthing specifically. I will never give birth, but I don't involve men in my healthcare at all anymore, and I don't think that I will. I also wonder, would a doctor today even be even feel empowered to knock the thermostat out of the wall, you know, today? I can't imagine that would happen. Okay, we need to come to a close. I really want to thank all the panelists, and I want to also note that Marie in the chat is asking, why didn't the staff accede to what the woman wanted? And that kind of echoes what I think Isabella was saying, is like, why are we even here? Why are we at the point of knocking thermostats out of walls? It's a really good question. Like, and Isabella framed it in terms of she's asking for crumbs and she's getting crumbs. Point taken. Okay, we are just at the top of the hour, and Debbie Hillman asked a question in the Q&A. Motherhood is more than just giving birth. In terms of WDI, are there any points that panelists want to make about being a mother of school-age children, teens, young adults, etc.? It's a great question, and there's a lot to say probably. I will just say, WDI does not have parenting tips, so we can't offer any parenting tips. However, do the moms, Lorraine and Candice, do the moms want to finish this out by saying, if you have anything to say about what it's like to mother school-age children today, we could close with that.
Yeah, the indoctrination that goes on in schools right now is frightening. And I think I think we are seeing that it really does play out largely among moms, because on the one hand, it is often moms that jump on board an ideology like trans and get behind it because that's their way of filtering their mother bear instinct. And that's what they think they're doing. On the flip side, just as many or more, it is moms on the other side saying, no, you will not harm my child. You will not confuse my daughter for a son or my son for a daughter. I gave birth to this kid. I know that they're a boy or that they're a girl.
Yeah, very quickly, I'll just say I'm the mom of tween girls. And regarding the indoctrination, I severely underestimated the competition that the indoctrinators put up. And just that I'm doing all that I can to just counter and just destroy that indoctrination. It is hard because I have a very strong-willed tween who drank the Kool-Aid pretty much. But I'm doing my best, and I'm gonna win.
I know that Lorraine fights so hard in her local school district to push back against the trans indoctrination of our children in schools. So we're going to close it out there. We're trying to stay very disciplined and keep these sessions to an hour. I hope you all really enjoyed this discussion. I know that I did. Thank you so much for joining. Next month will be on Article 3 concerning women's reproductive integrity. We don't have a date set for it, but we'll let you know as soon as we do. Thank you so much, Lorraine, Isabella, and Candice. Thank you, everyone who participated. I hope everyone enjoyed the discussion. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.